Welcome to the podcast. This is an informative conversation. I'm really excited for you to learn from Emily Popek, APR. She has been in the school world since 2016, and she has done a lot of research and work with schools on accessibility. There is some regulation going into effect in June of 2026. You're going to hear more about that regulation, but it talks about the Americans with Disability Act, and it really does impact the way that our schools communicate. We're really going to break down what the regulation says, what makes up accessibility. Emily breaks it down into 4 different parts. So it's not just, alt text on images or just closed captionings. There's many factors that you have to think about. We're going to talk about how your school can begin to take steps to meet this new regulation. And we're going to talk about, why it's such a struggle for schools. If you are wanting to, throw up or breathe into a paper bag because you're just like, oh my gosh, this is really overwhelming. It can be, but Emily is going to provide some solid advice and guidance. And the show notes have some great resources for you to be able to use. And instead of looking at this like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to know what to do. Hey, you can become the expert. You can look into this for your school, and you can help maybe be a little bit of a savior when it comes to making sure that your school is in compliance. And so I'm so excited for you to learn from Emily today. But first, let's get started with a little K-12 PR tip. All right, today's K-12 PR tip. If you are stressing out a little bit about alt text, whether it be for images that you're using on your social media pages or your website, AI might be able to help. Okay. A friend in the membership group was sharing how she was responding to some non-compliance issues, and she started using AI, specifically ChatGPT, to upload an image and ask ChatGPT to give her some alt text for the image. And in a matter of seconds, whoop, whoop, it spits out a lot of text. It's a little bit long. So I'm not saying you have to use this tool, but if you are just trying to get started in building your skills in what would be expected in alt text for images, AI might be your spot to start out. So try it. I do have a subscription to ChatGPT. I pay $20 a month. I think it's well worth it because, hey, AI is here to stay. It only keeps getting better. So definitely you could try it out for some of your alt text. Now, also in this today's tip is just there's a few more helpful resources in the show notes of today's episode than we actually had time to talk about in the show. So you guys, Emily shared a great spot to get some daily tips, just some easy little tips on accessibility, things to think about, and then also some other websites that have some helpful information for you. So check out the show notes, guys. And now let's get into our interview with Emily. Welcome to the podcast. Emily Popek, APR, is in the house. How are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited too. We love to talk about social media and the tips and tricks and strategies that are working well, but sometimes there's some really important subjects, and then I've got to get really smart people like you on the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about accessibility and digital accessibility for our schools today. But before we dive in, Emily, will you, if people don't know who you are, which you've gotten to speak all across the country, so most people do, but why don't you share your background and your role as Vice President of Strategic Communications with Nichols Strategy?
Sure. So I have been working in school PR since 2016. Prior to that, I was a print journalist. I earned my APR in 2022. And throughout my career, I've been doing client-facing work, which I only mention that to say that I've had the opportunity to work with dozens of different school districts, mostly in New York and California, but all across the country. And accessibility has really been a focus of my work from day one. With Nichols Strategies, we work exclusively with K-12 school districts, so we're an agency that serves just those partners in education. And in my role, I really focus on ensuring that the work we're doing for those clients is of the highest caliber.
So you went straight from print journalism into this world of client serving work. So not inside of a school, but you've worked with a lot of different schools.
That's right. I have been in that in the seat role, but as that sort of 1 or 2 days a week person who comes in to provide those services. So I've had sort of that little fly on the wall view of a lot of different districts, big and small, urban and rural, different parts of the country, and the sort of the common challenges they face and the things that are unique about them. So it's been really interesting to see that variety.
Yeah. So, as I said, today we're going to focus on that digital accessibility for our school PR friends. And to start, I think there's a lot of people thinking about this because there's some new legislation that's passed. And I've gotten the question several times. And like I said, I had to reach out to some experts, and you're the first one on the show so far to really talk about this. So I think it's called WCAG 2.1 Level AA. What can you tell us about this new law? Kind of what it's going to do to schools and what it means.
Sure, sure. There's a lot to know, so I'm just going to kind of hit some highlights for
Okay.
us. First off, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, right? So I'm not giving out any legal advice. I'm just going to kind of share with you my understanding of the landscape that we're in. The first thing to know is that this is actually regulation, not legislation. So this is not a law that was passed. This is a regulation that was updated at the federal level. That's not a huge difference, but I think it's important to know. Because if you go looking for the law, you're not going to find it. This is regulatory language. The broad strokes of this are that the federal government has finally updated the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is an old piece of legislation that's been around for a long time, but up until very recently, it didn't really have good specific language about what does this mean in the digital environment.
Okay.
If you want to Google this to read the fine print, what you want to look for is the Americans with Disabilities Act Title II regulations. That's what has been updated. And ADA.gov, the website for the Americans with Disabilities Act, has a great fact sheet that gives a really clear rundown of kind of what's new and what has changed. But I'll hit some of those highlights for us too.
Okay.
So what's called the final rule came down in April 2024. And what that tells us is that state and local governments, which includes school districts, their web content needs to meet a specific standard. And that's that alphabet soup that you just read out, the WCAG 2.1 level AA. So what that describes is a specific standard of accessibility that the federal government is saying we all need to meet this standard. They set a timeline for it. Your larger entities have until 2026 to comply. Smaller entities get an extra year. They get until 2027. So that's the guideline and that's the timeline. So what does that mean? That standard, which we call WCAG, WCAG 2.1 level AA, that is a global standard. It's not something that the federal government came up with. It's a global standard, and it's also not a new standard. It's a standard that has been around as a compliance standard around the globe for some time. The part that's new is the US federal government saying, okay, everybody, this is the standard you need to meet, and this is when you need to do it. So that's the part that's new. Another little footnote here is that distinction being made between small and larger entities, we're not talking about the number of students you have in the building. We're talking about the number of people who reside within your district boundaries. And that tipping point is 50,000. So if fewer than 50,000 people live within your district, you get an extra year. But for, I think, a lot of school districts, they're above that threshold. So I think a lot of districts have 2 years essentially to do this. It's also important to note that even though we have this time window, there are districts out there right now who have had complaints filed against them because of accessibility, who are working with the Federal Office of Civil Rights to resolve those complaints. All of that is to say, it's not as if nothing can happen until 2 years from now. So there are a lot of reasons to start this work, yesterday, to start putting those procedures in place now to make your content as accessible as possible. So that's kind of what's new. Andrea, do you have any questions about that piece of it before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, right? Of like, what do we actually need to do?
Yeah. No, I really like the way that you broke that down, and I think that it's important to know that it's really not anything new. I think the word accessibility and definitely website accessibility has been something that many schools have been working on. Um, Knowing that the 50,000 is basically residents and not like school students in your school or students plus staff. That's something I didn't realize. So that is good
Makes
to
a
know.
big difference. Makes a big difference.
Right. And so, April 2026 is, not that far away, maybe 18 months for some of these schools. So definitely being able to take some action, I guess. And then you said it's not law, it's regulation. But I think in the same respect, it's kind of the same thing because your school can get in trouble if it's not following these guidelines, right?
Yes. I've heard some questions about sort of what is that going to look like? What's going to happen if we don't? I don't have a lot of clarity on that, and I can't speculate. So that piece is still a little bit unknown. This is all very new, and the scope of it is, much broader and more detailed than it has been in the past. So I don't think we know what will happen if a school is not compliant by that deadline. That remains unknown. But obviously, we're here today to talk about how we do get compliant, right?
Right.
But I just wanted to throw that out because I know that's on people's minds. What's going to happen to us if if we don't make that deadline? We simply don't know at this point. So, best we can do, right, is try to get there within the time frame we have. And I believe because there was a little bit of a lead up time before the regulation actually went into effect, I believe what we're looking at is actually June of 2026,
Okay.
not April, because
Oh, okay.
there's that gap of time between when the regulation was finalized and when it takes effect. So that's my understanding. Mark that date on your calendar, June of 2026. That's
Okay.
the target we're aiming for compliance.
Okay. And you referenced a link that gave some good information. And so I just would love to get that direct link from you so that I can put it in the show notes. Okay, you guys. So we'll throw that in there. So if you look at the show notes, you can kind of go to that. That'll be helpful. So yes, I now like what is accessibility? Can you kind of break down the basic principles for the listeners?
Absolutely. So, accessibility is all about ensuring that people of all abilities can receive the information we're sharing with them, right? So, there's sort of four main principles that we want to be thinking about. The first principle is perceivability. This is sort of the lowest bar that we need to meet. Can everyone perceive this information? So, thinking about different abilities people have, someone might be blind, they might be deaf. How are they going to perceive the information we're sharing? So, for example, someone who's visually impaired, they might use software that reads text out loud to them, right? The way that Siri reads me my text messages when I'm driving. It's super cool technology, and I love that. But the text has to be machine readable for that to work. So if we have a couple words in a Canva graphic that's a JPEG, that's not machine readable text. It can't be read aloud to the person. So these are the things we have to think about. How are they going to perceive this information? If someone cannot hear what's being said in my video, do I have captions that they can read so that they are getting the same information? So perceivable is the first principle. Operable is the second one. Can people get around this information? Can they click on the link? Can they get into the drop-down menu? Can they fill out the online form that I want them to fill out? A lot of this stuff is outside of our purview as communications people, and it's good for us to be aware that this is a factor, this is one ingredient when we're working with our colleagues, our partners to develop things like that survey for our community or that form we want them to fill out, that link we want them to click. We want to make sure that everyone can get to that and operate it, whether they're using a keyboard, a mouse, or some other tool. So operability is the second principle. The third one is understandability. This is where we shine as communications people, ensuring that we're communicating in a way that everyone can understand, even if they might have a cognitive impairment. So, using clear language, short sentences, signposts to help people find their way through like a bulleted list. Not too many emojis and hashtags. I know we love our emojis and hashtags. Being really careful about how we use those, putting them at the end of our post instead of at the beginning, not using too many of those, and using link text that is clear and descriptive. So when people are going to click through, they know where they're going to end up. That's the understandability principle. And then the fourth one is robustness. And this just sort of has to do with working on all different platforms, all different software, all different hardware, things like that. Again, that one's a little bit outside of our sphere of influence as communications people, but it does sometimes come into play when we think about the file format that we're choosing when we share information. So if we were to upload something to our website, like a PowerPoint document, that's a little bit less robust. We can't ensure that everyone on every device is going to be able to easily get into that file and see the information, right? Have you ever tried to open a PowerPoint on your phone? That's not cute. It's not a fun time. So robustness sometimes comes into play when we think about the file format that we choose to share information. So those are the four principles of accessibility. And I listed all of that to sort of illustrate the point that accessibility is really a team sport. It's not something that a social media manager or communications professional can ensure single-handedly, because a lot of these aspects, there's always going to be aspects that are outside of our control. We can't control how accessible Instagram is, right? That's outside of our control. What we do have responsibility for is the content that we share on that platform and the platforms that we choose to use when we communicate. So especially when we're working with a third-party vendor for things like our school lunch menu or our board minutes or even our website, we don't directly control how those platforms are built, but we have some accountability there to be asking the right questions when we're selecting a tool, a platform, a vendor, a file format to use. So that's kind of a big picture look at like what are all the puzzle pieces that add up to accessible communications.
Okay. And when you mentioned understandability, you're talking about like shorter sentences, is there, because of the use of like Chat GPT, right, that we may use in regards to, taking something that we've written, you have the ability, I think, to say, hey, would you write this at a third grade reading level? Do you know, is there a recommended reading level that we strive for when we do our communication on behalf of the school?
That's a good question. I think the general consensus that I've heard a lot of people say as around a sixth grade reading level is a
Okay.
pretty good sweet spot. I think that that's how a lot of, like newspaper and conventional news media has typically been written, so that it's not too oversimplified, but it's still not going to be beyond the reach of, most people in our audience. So I think that's good to aim for. Sixth grade reading level is a good sweet spot.
Yeah. Okay, and then of course you mentioned emojis, which makes me cry because, it's statistically proven that on social media channels, emojis help increase engagement. It helps break up the text, it helps, add some pizzazz and some personality to it. And many times, I guess I will tell folks, hey, you can use emojis as bullet items. So obviously those are at the beginning of the sentence instead of the end, because you mentioned specifically if you do have them, put them more towards the end of the sentence than in the beginning. And I definitely agree. I mean, when we put it in the middle of a sentence, it can get kind of clunky. And I never ever recommend including an emoji without a word, like not in place of anything. But what else can you tell me about emojis just to, maybe provide me some better guidance?
Yeah, I think, it's it's very nuanced, right? How we use them. I think a couple things that I would recommend from an accessibility standpoint would be you already said one really important one, Andrea, which is to not use them to replace words.
Yep.
Because I think that can be a challenge for some folks to navigate, especially considering that, there might not always be consensus on what a given emoji represents. And that's another big one. Know what the emoji actually is. When you go to Emojipedia, it'll actually give you the proper name of every emoji, like what it actually is called. That's what someone's screen reader is going to read to them. So be aware of what they're actually going to hear. We see stuff on social media all the time about like, did you know that this emoji is really this? I always thought it was that, right? There's certain ones where maybe, not everyone sort of gets it all the time. So just being really careful that like it's definitely going to actually convey what you want it to mean.
Hmm.
And I think, and I'm sure this is what you would recommend anyway, of like sprinkle them on like seasoning, right? Think about you're adding salt to the dish. You
Hmm.
don't want it to overpower, but a little bit is usually okay. So that's how I would try to think of it. Like sprinkle it in,
Okay.
but you don't want that to be the first thing that people taste.
Right. Okay. I got you. I like it. That was really helpful just as far as the four components of understanding the accessibility. But when it comes to social media, like you said, we only have so much capabilities, I guess, in some of the realms. And I'm going to admit, Emily, we'll share a lot of images. I've got a bunch of images posting later today about our volleyball team, and there's 50 images. And I just state in the caption itself that we celebrated our pink night, and here's a bunch of volleyball pictures from a local photographer who's also an alum. Thanks for these great action shots. But I did not go in with all 50 pictures and put alt text on every single picture. So tell me a little bit when it comes to social media, what we should be thinking about.
Right. Well, you know what I'm gonna say, Andrea, which is that you probably should have all text for every picture. I can't let you off the hook on that one. Really, if you want your sighted users to see the picture,
Yep.
if there's something about that picture that you want your sighted audience to see, surely your audience who is not sighted deserves that same information. That's the argument I would make,
Yep.
right? So write the alt text for all the photos. That's the advice I'm going to give. Um, does it make what you're doing take longer? Yeah, it does. I'm not going
Hmm.
to pretend it doesn't. However, I would say that once you get in the habit of doing it, we're talking about literal seconds per photo, seconds, not minutes, not hours, seconds of your time to write that alt text because something is better than nothing. I don't want anyone to labor over it and feel like, oh, maybe I haven't crafted the perfect alt text for this image. It's okay. It's all right. Something is better than nothing. Do your best and move on. Keep doing it. You will get better at it and it will become part of your process. If the photo is important for some of your audience, it should be important for all of your audience, and you should take the 7 to 9 seconds to write the alt text that will now allow all of your audience to understand why you shared that particular photo. So that's my pitch for alt text. Most of the platforms we use have a tool that allows us to do that. It's pretty easy to Google that and find out if you're not sure like where to go to find that tool in the platform that you're using, right? So yeah, give it a shot is what I would say about alt text.
Do you know in the regulation, is it specifically calling out social media content? I mean, doing the right thing is one thing, and then the regulation, because you said it calls out the website. Does it call out any digital communications that the school's doing? So it would include social media.
It does. Yeah, we didn't talk about the exceptions for this new rule. Social media is not one of them. The
Okay.
exceptions are there are some exceptions for content you've already created and posted,
Okay.
right? So the social media post you put up a year ago, like don't worry about that. It's about what you're doing moving forward. And the reason I encourage people to start today is that by the time June 2026 rolls around, you will have this stuff down pat and you will be great at it. I think if you wait to start the practice, it's going to be hard to do it all the time. But yes, social media is understood as falling under this umbrella because it is digital content that the district is responsible for. It's digital content that the district is producing, creating, and sharing. So that's another distinction here. There is another exception for something that's sort of password protected or behind a paywall, so to speak. It's a little unclear to me what that actually means, but it's been suggested that something like your intranet the content you share only with your staff, right, could be an exception to this rule, but certainly your public facing social media is not excluded from this rule. It's still understood that this is content that you are creating and sharing publicly, and it is therefore subject to all the same requirements.
Okay. So
Uh,
now, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna add that uh, that someone asked me the other day about writing alt text when you're scheduling posts, and I think it's still important to, if you didn't do it the first time, come back and do it later. Like if you scheduled the post and you're like, oh, I forgot to write the alt text, go back in and do it after the fact. Getting in the habit is the most important thing.
Do you think you can do it? You can still add alt text even if you schedule?
I know you can on Facebook.
Okay.
I'm not sure about some of the third party platforms that
Okay.
some people use to manage social media.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about if all of those have the tool to do that for a scheduled post.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about AI because just in my membership group, I think it was last week, or maybe I was sitting down with someone, they're actually using AI to help them write alt text. So they're uploading a picture and then AI is helping spit out what the alt text should be. So because of this, I can't help but think that these social media platforms are going to have AI integrated by the time June 2026 comes around, where it's going to have alt text without me really having to do anything. How do you personally think AI is going to impact accessibility?
Yeah, I think you're not wrong. I definitely see these AI tools getting much more sophisticated at generating things like alt text, things like captions, things like transcripts. That just continues to get better and better, right? But I think that just like, auto-generated captions for a video, we're still at a point right now where we still need human eyes on that output because it's getting better. It's still not perfect. It's still not 100% solution. So by all means, yeah, I think it's a really great and important starting point to start with that AI generated alt text or video captions or transcript, and then be the human editor that ensures that everything came through properly, that the proper names are correct in your video captions, and everything got captured in that transcript, and that AI generated alt text like took into account the context in which you're sharing it, whatever the case may be. So yes, and I think those tools are going to make a big impact, and I think right now our human eyes are still an important part of that process.
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously it can get things wrong and we got to take a look at that. Um, why does accessible content support, some of our communication goals?
For me, it's really simple because I know that we all want the same thing. We want the audience we're targeting to be able to engage in our content without barriers. The last thing we want is to, identify an audience that it's really important for us to reach, to craft a message that's really important to us that they hear, to send that message out on the channel that we chose, and then we have that last mile problem where they can't even, see the image we shared with them. They can't even hear what's being said in the video. That's the last thing we want, right? We don't want any barriers between our message and our audience. We never want that. So accessibility is one of the ways that we ensure that we won't have those speed bumps on the road to us achieving our communications goals.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question in regards to, I know I just asked you about, okay, I got 50 volleyball pictures, and right now I don't have alt text on those. You talked about having a Canva graphic, and if we have words on there, they're not accessible with unless you would put them in the alt text. What about having a image but repeating all of the context of what's on the image or the graphic, but you're repeating that in the caption, and I only have the one image, so I don't have multiple. What do you think that would count, or do you still need to do the alt text so that that's super clear?
I think it's a yes and. So I think
Okay.
there's sort of three legs of the stool that I would recommend. One is to limit the amount of text that you put in an image. That's really supportive for a lot of people, not just people with visual impairments, because cramming a lot of text into a visual image is really limiting. It's not going to scale well to different screen sizes. Someone might not be able to read the font, et cetera, et cetera. So, number one, small amount of text in our image. Number two, repeating all the crucial information in the actual caption and the body of the post. 100% agree. I think that's really supportive for a lot of our audiences who might sort of glance past the image. They might not read the fine print. This sort of repeats it, ensures that it's there. And then, also that supports someone who's using that screen reader. And I think it needs to be in the alt text too, because of that use case where someone's going to say, read me the alt text of all the images in my feed, and that's the way that they're going to try to get the information. So it's not an either or, in my opinion. The best practice would really be all of the above.
Okay. All right. Well, that's helpful. And I would just say, on behalf of any other 46-year-olds that now need reading glasses, and even that, I mean, when you have an image with a lot of text on it, my phone will make all the captions bigger, but it doesn't work on graphics. So I am like trying to like make it bigger with my fingers and then trying to go from side to side. It's challenging. So I definitely have been preaching limit the text on your graphics, for quite some time.
Yes, and that's it right there. It's this rising tide that lifts all ships. It really supports a lot of your audience to have your really, really important information in that scalable machine readable text that, like you said, is going to be suited to the size of their screen and the size that they want to read text at.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm sure some of you are listening and you're getting, maybe you're starting to hyperventilate a little bit because you're just like, oh my goodness, I'm so overwhelmed. I just always like to remind people that when some of these changes happen, in some cases, this is a lot of job security because you having to know and stay on top of these things and know how to do it the right way so that you are staying in compliance and you are able to reach all of your, constituents in your region and all of that. Like that is a definite benefit and a strong asset that you bring to your team. So before, getting too nervous about this, just maybe taking a deep breath and be like, okay, I can take this on. And then when I learn how to do this, and take the time to do it right, that's an asset for my school. Don't you agree?
I do, and I think that I really see accessibility as an area with a ton of growth. Disabilities are not going to go away. It's not going to be a thing of the past. And being, agile enough to communicate with our changing audiences as we move forward into the future, I agree, is a huge part of the value that we bring to this role and to the schools that we serve.
Yeah. So why do you think schools struggle so much when it comes to accessibility?
I think the biggest thing is that this is brand new information for so many of us, right? When we learned how to do our jobs, whether that was, in the classroom, in higher education, or, on the job learning, we were not taught about this, most of us. This was not part of the curriculum, right? So it's brand new. And the people around us were not taught this either. Our administrators, our classroom teachers, our coaches, our front office staff, this was also not part of their learning about how things work in a school system. So it's brand new, and to do it successfully, it really requires a different mindset than maybe we had brought to our work previously. The other thing that I think is hard, for whatever reason, I find that schools are very often really still like a print first approach to communication. Very often I see the prevalence of like preparing content as if it was going to be printed and distributed on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I feel like that's sort of the default mindset for a lot of our communications sort of start their life that way. I don't know why that is, but I see it a lot in schools that like that 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is sort of the template for all communication. So to really do accessibility well, requires us to let go of that 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that exists in our mind or in the mind of our school secretary or our district clerk or whomever, and free the content from that format, and let it be a little more flexible, a little more versatile to fit into different environments. So I think that is also a challenge because the people that we work with and the environments we're in are very accustomed to communicating in an 8.5 by 11 format. And we have to sort of break free of that to do accessibility really effectively and well.
Yeah. I just want to add to that. I mean, as far as like a tool, and I think about a lot of people sharing flyers and, little whatever upcoming events. We've certainly done a lot with Instagram Reels. And the great thing about one of those tools is it has an auto caption sticker that auto captions. And of course, you need to correct it because it's not going to get everything right. But I just think about accessibility. If all of a sudden I'm inviting people to an upcoming Veterans Day program or whatever it might be, and it's through video, and then I've got that text on there, like that is helping someone that can't hear definitely be able to see that. And then I guess I'm not sure how the captions, if those captions in Instagram can go into a reader for somebody that is not able to see. Do you know that?
That's a good question. Would a screen reader be able to read captions out loud? I don't know the answer, but
Yeah.
that's something good to look into. I
Okay.
would say, but that's where we think again about alternatives, right? Is like, if ask yourself this question every time. If they can't see it, can they hear it? And if they can't hear it, can they see it? So, if you have captions on your reel, like,
Oh,
can you have a voiceover that's
yeah.
conveying the same information? Now you've done them both, and you're
Yes.
good,
Okay.
right?
Yes, that is perfect. So if you can hear it, or if you can't see it, can you hear it? And if you can't hear it, then can you see it? Well, you
Yes.
are okay that way because basically the captions are just taking what the person is saying in the video and
Right.
putting them on the screen. So
Yes.
awesome. We gave them a solution, I guess, and somewhat. And then I just want to say too, like why we struggle. It's new to us. We think paper first. And then Emily, I would just go back to what you said is it's such a team sport that is hard because it's hard to get everybody thinking about this to make it a little bit easier at the end. And so I think as we go through this, we all stick together. That's why I hang out with smart people like Emily and others on this podcast. Is just like, okay, we find a tool that maybe works well, or maybe we've got some kind of standard. Like, hey, if you want to submit this, you need to make sure, one, two, and three, that this is the way you send it, and then that'll make it easier for everybody. Obviously, it's going to take some time, but I think that's probably pretty valid too, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It can be overwhelming. You mentioned people kind of feeling like, oh my goodness, starting to hyperventilate, right? I think we can all relate to that. What I would say to that is like just pick one thing. Start where you are. Think about, is there one practice that I can sort of maybe start doing a little differently or try doing differently, and see how it goes. Try it out. And if you hit a wall, if you hit a snag, right, that's when you reach out to your school PR friends. Hey, how are you handling this, right? What's worked for you? But the thing really is just to begin, and take it one step at a time. You're not going to get there overnight, but starting today is the best time to start.
And I know there's companies out there that specialize in helping with this. Do you have any recommendations as far as, anybody if they're looking for help that way? Or is that something where really working with your web provider and then just working within like the social platforms that you should be able to, kind of get the guidance and the help that you need?
I would say a lot of this we can do ourselves, we can do in-house, and I would definitely recommend that, if you're dealing with things like a lot of PDF files on your website, stuff like that in your digital content arena, that's something I would suggest, looking for a vendor to support with because PDF remediation is a whole other beast. It's pretty intense and demanding. And there's vendors out there like Alliant who can take that lift off your plate and do that remediation work for you. and that makes a big difference. So
Okay.
for things like PDFs, document management, I would definitely encourage people to look into vendor support for things like that because it's a big lift to do on your own.
Okay, that helps. So, as we wrap up this interview, what would you say is your best social media tip, Emily?
My best social media tip is really just to think about audience experience. Sometimes I think we fall in love with our own Canva graphics, right? Or the clever caption we wrote, or the cute emojis we chose. And that stuff is part of what makes social media so much fun. And I think it's also important to remember what our audience is going to get out of that, how our audience is going to receive that. Are they really going to get what we're saying? Are they really going to watch the whole video? Are they really going to be able to read our caption if we put all those emojis in it? Just making sure that we're really thinking about that end user experience when we're putting that content together and sharing it with them. I think that's really important.
Awesome. So, if somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way to stay connected to you, Emily?
Yeah, I would love for folks to find me on LinkedIn, Emily F. Popek. I love connecting with all my school PR friends there, and I would love to hear from you.
Awesome. So, we'll definitely share a link there. And is it okay if we share your email address in the show notes?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then Emily does a lot of speaking. And so I'm sure, if you have a group or, either local, regional, or state, I'm sure Emily would love to be able to come visit and kind of share some of these things with you folks as well. Is that okay that I plugged that, Emily?
1000%. I would love for you to think of me for your next SPRA event. I would love to zoom in and talk to your admin team about why accessibility is important, and get some more converts to this cause. So absolutely would love to talk to folks about speaking to their group.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot in this session. We'll get the show notes out for everybody. Thanks for listening in. And if you love this conversation, you're going to love next week when we've got another great guest. So we'll see you guys soon and keep telling those stories. Okay. Bye, Emily.
Thank you. Bye bye.